So the idea of this next one is to build the ultimate aggressive heavyweight of all time. Now, this doesn't mean the ultimate heavyweight of all time, because guys like Muhammad Ali and Gene Tunney, their movement isn't really going to be necessary for this greatest heavyweight of all time. Guys like Tyson Fury, their adaptability isn't necessarily going to be necessary for someone that I just want to seek and destroy. So I'm going to create the greatest aggressive heavyweight of all time, just using legendary heavyweights in the past, their aggressive tendencies. Now, similarly to the ultimate boxer of all time, I'm going to try and make this a bit of a series. I'm going to just use one fighter for each stat, so I can't use a fighter twice. I can only use heavyweights, and I'm going to go through an array of different stats to try and build the ultimate aggressive boxer in the heavyweight division of all time. Now, I'm going to start off with power. Now, power is a bit of an easy one for me. Now, the heavyweight division has loads of big punchers. Mike Tyson, George Foreman, Sonny Liston, Joe Louis. But there's one that stands out to me in the heavyweight division, and that's Ernie Shavers. Now, lots of people tell me, oh, you can't pick Ernie Shavers. How can you pick Ernie Shavers over Mike Tyson? Look at the knockouts. I'm going with what Muhammad Ali said. I'm going with what George Foreman said. I'm going with what Larry Holmes said. All of these guys said that he was the hardest puncher they ever faced. You just have to watch the right hand that cracks Larry Holmes on the floor. How he got up from that, I have no idea. You have to watch the Ken Norton knockout. He stiffens Jimmy Ellis up on the floor. So for power, I am going with the punching power of Ernie Shavers, and it's non-negotiable. Now, moving on to speed and combinations. When it comes to just pure speed, there are a few that can stand out. Obviously, Tyson was one of the freakish ones up close. That explosive speed. There's never been a more explosive heavyweight. But I'm not going to pick him because I want him elsewhere. And I think there's one that was actually faster. Muhammad Ali's speed would come into play, but it was more on the straight long shots, whereas I want someone that's fast up close and can throw those combos. So I'm going to go with Floyd Patterson, who may even to this day still be the fastest heavyweight of all time, basically because he was a lot smaller than the other heavyweights. Patterson's combination punches were incredible. The way he was able to just let his hands go and fly, he was very powerful as well. The way he would just knock people out. You look at the gazelle hook against Ingemar Johansson. One of the greatest combination punching heavyweights of all time, and I want him in my speed category. For chin, it's non-negotiable. George Savallo. There are a few you could pick. Vitaly Klitschko never dropped as a world champion. I believe the only heavyweight champion in history that was never dropped. And you look at the right uppercut he took from Lennox Lewis. That would have like decapitated an elephant. We could also pick David Tua, a man that was very, very rarely dropped against huge punchers. The Ike Ibeabuchi fight where they broke the punch stat records. And Ibeabuchi, the president, was a big puncher, man. But Savallo faced the likes of Patterson, Foreman, Frazier, Ali, Cleveland Williams, and he was never dropped close to 100 fights. Like, people were smacking this guy and he was just firm in it like no one else. So chin is George Savallo. Now, inside fighting, if you're going to have an aggressive fighter, you need to be able to do all the tricky stuff up close. And there's not that many heavyweights that were really as crafty inside. You obviously have Joe Frazier, who was always inside, who would just battle away, crafty. But Frazier's strength, in my opinion, was more getting up close. You have Tyson, who was explosive in that mid-range, but a lot of the times when he up close, he'd be in the clinch. I'm going to go with Riddick Bowe's in-fighting ability. Now, Riddick Bowe was obviously trained by the legendary Eddie Futch, extremely crafty, but I used to love watching Riddick Bowe's inside work. He was extremely crafty, extremely strong, and he had that killer instinct as well. So for inside fighting, I'm going to go with Riddick Bowe. Now, obviously, to get inside, you're going to need a jab. There are a few jabs you could use. I think Larry Holmes has the greatest jab in the heavyweight division, but it was more of a movement jab. Obviously served the purpose and landed the shots. But in this instance, I want my jab to crush my opponent and get me in. So I'm going with Sonny Liston, because that guy hit you like a truck. And his jab would get this extra extension on it. It was like a battering ram to close the distance. He blitzed Floyd Patterson twice in the first round. He cleared every top 10 contender. I believe the only man to do so. And he had some dodgy dealings with the mob as well, which kind of stains his reputation as champion. But on his way up, when he was fighting the really good heavyweights coming up, until he destroyed Patterson twice in the first round, that jab was just crushing people. So for jab, I'm using Sonny Liston's battering ram. Now, I want my fighter to maintain an intensity that's unbearable. Once they're up close, they're just going to work. They're going to chip away their opposition. And there's no one that works at a more relentless pace than Rocky Marciano. Marciano never stopped throwing punches. He's going to be my pick for intensity because I want my fighter to get up close the range with that Sonny Liston jab, and absolutely batter him intensely, as Rocky used to do. He used to throw dozens and dozens and dozens of haymakers. I would say that the most legendary endurance of any fighter, pound for pound, in history. But when you consider the size into account, it's just, yeah. I want Rocky Marciano's intensity. And then moving on to toughness and getting in, I think you could give Rocky a shout as well. But I'm going to take Joe Frazier's physical toughness. Just his ability to absorb punishment. I think Joe Frazier's fights with Muhammad Ali, I don't think they are the most brutal heavyweight fights in history. Even the former fights where he's absolutely battered from pillar to post. He was knocked down 6 times. Everyone says that. But he also got up 6 times. He kept getting up. Frazier's toughness was off the charts, and he was completely blind in one eye. The 14th round of the Thriller in Manila, he wanted to go out, and his other eye was completely closed. The most grueling heavyweight fight in history. He's completely blind, completely battered. Ali said he's on the verge of death, and he wants to go out. Eddie Futch obviously pulled him out, but my toughness is going to go with Joe Frazier, which means my left hook, which is where I probably would have picked Frazier, is going to have to go elsewhere. And for my left hook, I'm going to go with Tommy Morrison, man. Just look at that Razor Ruddock left hook. That's all you need to see. Tommy Morrison's left hook was it's like a death punch. The way he just connected that. Tommy Morrison's left hook was just phenomenal. The way he just iced people with it. I believe he, if I've read this correctly, had up to like 100 knockouts with that left hook in the amateurs. But it was really brutal. The way he delivered it was phenomenal. So for left hook, Tommy Morrison. Now, obviously, when the fight gets tough, you need heart. There's so many you can pick. I could go with the likes of Evander Holyfield, who had those brutal wars with Riddick Bowe, who stepped in with Tyson. Lennox Lewis had so many brutal fights. But I think you got to go with Muhammad Ali for heart. Because to dig in the fights he dug in, it's just toughness, chin, you could pick Ali, but heart as well. He was just the gutsiest fighter because he had all the skill, he had all the talent in his younger days. He didn't really need to show that heart. But once the reflexes went and he was in with these killers, he was just digging in. And so much so that it was actually getting painful to watch when he was fighting Burbick and Larry Holmes. But probably one of the toughest heavyweights of the 70s. It's hard to say because they were all tough, like Joe Frazier, but for someone that had all the tools Ali had, to have that toughness as well, yeah, heart, Ali. Now, I want my fighter to be defensively sound. There's a lot of good defensive heavyweights, but I want him to be defensively sound up close. This one might seem a little bit off topic, but I'm going with James Toney, who absolutely schooled Evander Holyfield and was a master at defending himself in the pocket. James Toney's defense, I wouldn't necessarily want my fighter using that shoulder roll, but if he had James Toney's defensive instincts and his reactions, he would be safe for me. So defense, I'm going with James Toney. My footwork, now I want my fighter to be a little bit crafty. Another candidate for defense could be this particular fighter I'm going to use for footwork, but I'm going to go with Jersey Joe Walcott's footwork. Jersey Joe Walcott was a master. Just a little twitches, but the way he was able to move his feet, you just see him baffling opposition. The distance control, just getting in and out of range. And he never wasted energy. He used to kind of like stumble across, I say stumble, but effortlessly stumble across the ring. Just used to plod. But it was the rhythm of it was so perfect. He was always balanced, and his counter punching was so perfect because his feet were so set. So my fighter's footwork is going to go with Jersey Joe Walcott. Now, when you're up close, we've got Tommy Morrison's left hook. I want to dig a right uppercut. You could pick Lennox Lewis, whose uppercut nearly decapitated Klitschko. But I'm going with Tyson because you can't get a more devastating right uppercut than Tyson. Now, he obviously set that up with a right hook to the body. But on his own, it's just such a brutal shot. So my right uppercut is going to go with a prime Mike Tyson, which then leads me onto my right hand, which I'm going to give to Lennox Lewis. Because the right hand he dropped Hasim Rahman with, and multiple other fighters with, was just beautiful. The way it was thrown, the way it was delivered, at that mid-range as well. Right hand is Lennox Lewis. Now for killer instinct, when my guy has his fighter hurt, If he's got Ernie Shaver's power and Tyson's right uppercut, then he's not going to need the killer instinct because the guy's going to be down. But say he's up there against the George Savallo kind of fighter. Killer instinct's going to be Joe Louis, who once he had you hurt, he finished you off. Has an array of the most beautiful and brutal knockouts in boxing history. Killer instinct, the great Joe Louis. Now counter-punching. Counter-punching up close in the pocket. Kind of mid-range. You don't always have to be up close with this fight. You can kind of attack at the mid-range. But I'm going to go with Ezard Charles counter-punches. In my opinion, the greatest counter-puncher in history. Because he had knockout concussive power of it as well. But the way he would kind of step to the side, attack his opponents and still land those counter-punches. Kind of lead you on. He could counter-punch to the body, to the head with either hand. With knockout efficiency. He was extremely clean. The timing was off the charts. And counter-punch is going to go with Ezard Charles. Now, it's all well and good being intense like Rocky Marciano. But you're going to need that ferocity in you as well. You're going to need to want to get your opponents out of there. So for ferocity, I'm going to go with Jack Dempsey. Now, Jack Dempsey was just... His ferocity was the whole reason boxing exploded in the 1920s. It was a little bit boring before Jack Dempsey. You had the heavyweight champion of the world, Jess Willard, who was a bit of a ploddy fighter, absolutely huge. Dempsey went out, broke his ribs, his cheekbone, knocked out multiple teeth, and dropped him 7 times in the first round, I think. And then it just exploded. The 1920s, everyone was on Dempsey. Everyone wanted to see this homeless guy that was just destroying people. He's the main reason the live broadcasts were put on the radio for sports. And he absolutely boomed boxing in the 1920s, made it the biggest sport in the country. And basically because he just wanted to go out there and batter people. Now, if you read his book, he was actually a very intelligent man. And the reason he was so ferocious is because he was so fearful of those fighters and he didn't want to get knocked out himself. Tyson based a lot of his ferocity on Dempsey. So for ferocity, I'm going with Jack Dempsey. And it almost feels wrong to not have George Foreman in an aggressive fighters list because he could fit in the punching power category. He could fit in the chin category because he was very rarely dropped too. But I'm going to put him in with aura of intimidation. Now, Liston is the most intimidating fighter I've ever seen, and Tyson. But a prime George Foreman, man, he used to make people's legs shake. Before the fight, during the fight, oh man, he was just scary. And it's quite crazy. It's quite crazy when you see the opposite side of him in his second career when he was older, his second reign as heavyweight champion. But just the way he used to stare his opposition down, just that boom, that killer look. And the way he would just batter people, blast people away. Crazy. So for aura of intimidation, I'm going with a prime George Foreman. And that is my ultimate heavyweight of all time. I flew through that. I couldn't get into much detail as I would like, but there you go. Let me know if you agree in the comment section below. And let me know if there's anything you change.